I did an audition for No Country, and the response was, "Who lit it?" They didn't even mention me. They liked the way it was lit, though. The role was Heath Ledger's, and he had pulled out of that role. And they said, "Okay, fine." And they faxed me 6 scenes. I had to be there at 9 o'clock the next morning, and I was.
Hey, it's Guy Raz here, and this is The Great Creators, where I bring you conversations with musicians, actors, and performers at the top of their game. And my guest today, actor Josh Brolin. Josh Brolin is one of the most recognizable actors of his generation. You know his face, and you definitely know his voice from films like The Goonies, No Country for Old Men, True Grit, Avengers, and Dune. But what you probably don't know is Josh's fascinating and challenging life story. His dad is the actor James Brolin, but despite having a famous dad, Josh's life was anything from easy. Josh has written about his fascinating life story off-screen in a new memoir. It's called From Under the Truck. And without further ado, here is my conversation with actor Josh Brolin.
You know what? The 50s so far have been amazing. 50 is like fuck it mode.
Yeah.
50 is like all the stuff that you were too afraid to do, and you just say, fuck it.
I believe that, actually.
That's
I really do. I believe that in your 40s, you start to feel mastery over what you do.
Whatever skill set that you've embraced.
Right. It's certainly in your life, like, you really start to achieve this mastery in as an actor, right? And for me, in my profession as an interviewer, I've been doing this for 25 years. And then I feel like in your 50s, it's when you really start to get comfortable in your skin. Is that been your experience?
You start to care less about that your skin exists, period. It's not your skin. It's like I understand now. I can see now, even though I came across and presented myself as some rebellious, fuck you, I don't care what you think. And the louder that is, the more obvious it becomes how much you care. And then, like, there was a kid that looked at me. I was leaving a parking lot yesterday. And I grew up partially in Santa Barbara, and, you know, it's very tough to tell a story about Montecito and then, like, you know, say it was scrappy and all this kind of stuff because people think it's a bunch of rich kids and all that. So I was leaving this parking lot, this physio guy that I went to go see because my ankle, and this kid, it was so great. There was a bunch of like 17 to 19-year-old kids. And this kid got a little spooked because I was behind him, but I was going super slow, just waiting for them to kind of get out of the way. And he stared me down. And I rolled down my window and I said, "Are you staring me down?" And he said, "Yes." And I said, "Because you thought I was going to hit you?" And he said, "Yes." And I said, "I'm not going to hit you." And he goes, "I appreciate that." And it was such a weird exchange because that would normally be one of those things that in your adolescence you go, "What the fuck are you looking at?"
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And at least where I'm from. And now there's nothing to prove anymore. You just go, "Look, I could get outside and fight, but I don't want to fight you. I want to let you know that I got that you were spooked and sorry to spook you," basically.
I thought when you rolled down the window and said, "Are you staring me down?" and he said, "Yes," and you said, "Why?" He was going to say, "I love No Country for Old Men." Like, I thought that's where the story was going. I was like, wow,
No.
what a precocious teenager.
It's not a good thing for me to admit, and I admit it often, and it's this thing that I remember De Niro saying this about Times Square. He was like, the reason why you get recognized for the most part is because you want to get recognized, that there's something in you but if you're a good enough actor, you should be able to blend in anywhere. And this is like during the time of Raging Bull and all that. He said he could go down to Times Square and just blend right in. I've always been able to blend in. It's either that, and I don't want to come across as some like thug, but, you know, I know I have a Neanderthalic type of face, so I know I can keep people
stone-etched face,
whatever the
chiseled
jaw. But even now, like, I have a little bit of a cold. I see my eyes are swollen. I can keep people away if I need to, but just giving them a hard look. Yeah. You know what I mean? But I don't think it's that so much. I think it's that you can blend in if you want to, and I've never wanted to not blend in.
Yeah. So, all right, let's kind of dive into this because I think, and this is going to be a theme certainly in the beginning of this conversation, which is a lot of people assume things about children of actors, right?
Okay.
Now, that they live a certain way or that they have these charmed lives. And in some cases, that might be true, right? If you are, Taylor Swift's child, she doesn't have a child, but that would be a certain life. But
not necessarily. That's what
not necessarily.
Not necessarily. It depends on the parent.
Right.
It doesn't depend on the bank account. It depends on the parent.
Right. You, first of all, you grew up certainly in the early part of your life on farms. I mean, Paso Robles, Santa Barbara area, sort of what we call Central California. It's the sort of central coast.
It is central.
Yeah. And how much of a presence was your dad? How much was he around when you were growing up? Because he was already, he wasn't, a household name, but he was famous.
He was famous because of a show that he did called Marcus Welby. So before that, he was not famous. Before that, it was a movie, a part here, a part there, and there wasn't a lot of money. My dad was a middle-class guy. My mom came from no money, teachers in Corpus Christi, Texas. So there wasn't a lot of money. And then my dad, it was like the Friends of its time. He said literally within a couple of weeks, it was the #1 show. But even then, the most he ever got paid for that show was $11,000 an episode, which was a lot of fucking money back then.
Yeah.
But it wasn't Peter Falk money. When Peter Falk's lawyer said, "You're sick and you're not, and you're well when I tell you you're well," because he came across the producer's, monetary breakdown and realized how much money they were making. And Peter Falk and Columbo went from making $10,000 an episode to $175,000 an episode.
Wow.
So it was still back kind of before that happened. And I remember it. I remember the fame because my dad's I can go so far as to say he's introverted. And I think the fame confused him and irritated him.
Yeah.
But confusion, I think, is really what it was. So my experience of my dad, the attention that was put on my dad was a negative thing. And then I had a mother also that was like, we don't need to live here if we don't want. Now, everybody's like that now. Oh, you can live away. You can live in Point Doom. You don't have to live in the valley, whatever. That was the version of it then. My mom said, let's go to Paso Robles. I'm a country girl. So my address was Route 1, Box 71A,
Yeah.
That's rural. And I grew up around rural people, so it was good. I was around a lot less actors than I was around country western people.
And horses.
And yeah, tons of horses. I mean, the most we had ever was 65 horses, but that was horse country. Now it's known as wine country. There were 2 wineries when I was there. There's 390 or whatever now, but it was rural farming community and horse community.
You grew up in, you were a child in the 70s and a sort of teenager in the 80s, but you paint a picture of I guess it's fair to say, a pretty complicated upbringing. I mean, you obviously loved your mother. It was complicated. Your parents' marriage was complicated. Your mom was having a relationship also with this guy. Tell me a little bit about what you remember as a child in that world around you.
I mean, I was in the nucleus of it all. That's the thing. I mean, it's I'm still grappling, which I don't know if you did this with your book, probably not, but because it's a, quote unquote memoir of what the book is about. People start receiving the book and they start telling you what, somebody's crying, somebody's saying they're jealous, somebody's saying they're, I think I can say one thing for sure, and that's that my mom created in me what she was looking for in a man. So she wanted the drunk cowboy, tough fighter, stand up to anybody, man, and what she considered a man. And she was so loud and kind of gregarious and fun, but also just didn't know when to stop, which was also a trait that I carried on after she passed. But being around cowboys, being around truck drivers, being around, driving 50, 60,000 miles a year, which she did because she didn't fly, waking up in the middle of the night and waking us up and saying, I want a Whataburger. And we say, like, we have school in 3 hours. And she goes, it doesn't matter, get in the car, and driving 2.5 days to go get a Whataburger. It sounds insane.
It does, yeah.
But it was more the adventure. Even my dad says it now. My dad says, I would get woken up in the middle of the night by your mother, and I'd be so irritated. But within hours, we would be doing something that was so crazy and fun, and I'd be on the hood looking at tarantulas coming up a hill from a pond and how she knew that was going to happen. It was just like my mother was always looking for the more vivid experience, and she didn't do drugs.
You write in the book that my father feared my mother, so he mostly stayed away. So
I think as time went on.
Yeah. So what did that mean? I mean, were there weeks or months where he would be gone?
No, I don't think months. I mean, he would look, I take my family on every job I go to. There was only one job that I did, and that was recently when I went to London for 2 weeks, and I didn't bring them. And it was, I didn't like it. I probably won't do it again, at least until they get ensconced in school, and then that becomes a thing. Whereas I think back then it was more like, hey, I have to go work.
Yeah.
This is what men do. They have to go work. So when my mom moved up to Paso Robles, and if my dad's, doing a series, he has to be down there. And I think he really made an effort, a valiant effort, to get up to Paso Robles. Say he would work until 10 on Friday night, get in the car by 11, make it to Paso Robles by 3, fall asleep, sleep 3 hours after you've worked for a full week, 12 hours a day, and then spend some time with his kids. Well, after a while, that starts to, wear on you. It starts to affect your work and all that kind of stuff. So I think it wasn't just because of my mom, but my mom was a great excuse to want to stay away from her, because it's the truth. I saw it with every single relationship my mother had, whether it was a friend or somebody that she was sleeping with or somebody who was you either loved her or you hated her, and it was usually both, and it depended on when.
And it was you and your brother Jess.
Mm-hmm.
And how did he? I mean, obviously, kids, it's hard to kind of reimagine what that dynamic was like. But what's your sense of how he kind of saw things around him?
It's again, it goes back to personality, and with my mother, which I don't think helped me when I went out into life and started dealing with people. I was told I was a very well-mannered kid, which was not, that's maybe the Texas in my mother. It was thank you and this and chew with your mouth closed and all that kind of stuff. But I know later, maybe it was when the drinking started to kind of come into which was pretty early. I was somebody who just naturally fought back, because I looked at my mother and my father, I make this up, but I looked at my mother and my father, and I was like, who's going to win? Who is the most resilient? Who's going to get through the obstacle? It's my mother, obviously. He's being yelled at while he's watering the plants and lazy, this, that, you know what I mean? And I go, well, so you have to act more like her. Whereas I think my brother was more, he didn't have the fight in him. He wasn't going to go to war, and I was going to go to war to save myself, and with my mother, I remember my dad saying it, and it sounds horrible. And, both had their impatience. There was an air of impatience with both of them. One was silent and one was extremely loud. And I wanted the loud one because I knew where I stood. The silent one I didn't trust because I didn't know where it was just too elusive for me. But with my brother, I just don't think that he had the fight. I mean, we're close now and we talk about it. My brother likes things very simple. He doesn't want to complicate his life at all. And he's stuck to that. He's 52 years old, and he's like, "No, I'm good. I'm good. I figured out a design that works for me." He's super funny, super dry. You know, there's a lot of humor, inappropriate humor that comes out of this family. I'm sure in compensation for what was, and we run with that, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, no, it does. And we've had a lot of children of actors on the show who are also themselves actors, and I think that makes a lot of sense because it's like, you know, a lot of great athletes are children of great athletes. There must be some genetic connection, right? Like that you have this talent, but everything in your life leading up until the moment you were a teenager, really like 15, 16, was not pointing you in that direction. You were not the kid that was like, I want to be in the High School Musical. Like that's not who you were at all.
Quite the opposite. I had no interest. I had no interest at all. When I became an actor, my friends were confused. They just, it just was not. I loved law in high school, even though I fucked around a lot in high school. I loved law. I did youth and society. I did law 1 through law 4. I was very, very into law and especially criminal law. So I became a criminal instead. It was, there were things I wanted to do in the book. You haven't read it because you haven't gotten there yet, but and I know you've read part of the book. I want to say that, but there's a restaurant that I was working in Santa Barbara called Rocky Glenny's, and I loved it. I mean, it was an open kitchen. I loved the feeling. I loved the drama. I loved the theatrical aspects of it. So acting to me was people paying attention to you when you didn't want them to pay attention to you, about something that had more to do with them than you.
Yeah.
And then I took a theater class in school, and it was based on improvisation. And I got on stage, and the teacher, Mary, I don't remember her last name, picked me first, and she said, "Get up on stage, create a character, any character you want, and the house down here in the seats are going to ask you questions, and you answer as the character." And when I did that, there was something that shifted. I thought, oh, this is a whole molding of wet clay. This is behavioral. This is something that I know nothing, that I didn't attach to acting at all. What I attached to acting was fame, TV, and people hounding you. I didn't know it was a study of behavior. I didn't know it was about that. And I think that now, whether children of actors and, I even, and I won't tell you whose house I went to, somebody invited me to their house, and they've been famous for a very long time. And it was the weekend. Well, I can't imagine having help over the weekend. Why would you need it? Especially if 3 or 4 people are coming over. But we brought them some croissants and all that. And he yelled out to maybe a housekeeper or a helper. And he said, "Maria, I want this one. This looks delectable," or whatever. "I want this one." I was like, "Why don't you just open the fucking box and grab the croissant?" Like, I don't understand that mentality. I never understood that mentality because what I learned at that point, it wasn't a conscious thing, was that acting and creating is mirroring in some way the hidden behaviors of the human race. And that's what we're representing. And to get away from the human race and to become a drone within your fame and within your power and money and status and whatever that is to get away from the very thing that you're representing. It makes no sense to me. How do I stay in the soup? How do I continue to be in the cauldron to be able to represent properly the thing that I'm representing?
It's interesting because I know that you basically have said, that any fear you had, right? Any fear you had of being on stage kind of evaporated when you could embody a character, when you were being something that you weren't necessarily, that wasn't you. You were something, right? It is you. But because you are embodying a character at that moment, it didn't, for some reason, you didn't have that fear, that fright on stage.
Unlike writing a book, which you feel is absolutely 100,000% you. And it's been the scariest process I've gone through yet, for sure.
Yeah.
But again, as you and I were talking about before, as you reach 50, you say, fuck it. I want to make sure that I open all the wounds, not just to throw up on everybody, but to explore them further and to see more what I'm made of. And so to answer your question, yeah, there's a thing on stage, and I still have it. I just played something in London for Ryan Johnson, and it was really wonderful, and it was something that I needed to scare myself, and it was a role that scared me. It was a role that I read, and I go, I don't know if I'm good enough to do this, which was great. I didn't want to be comfortable. And I studied and I prepped and I read it over 100 times, and I would do it in my hotel room, and I'd get called from the front desk downstairs, can you please be quiet? It's 2 a.m. And, I felt like a kid again doing stage. Yeah. And that's the way I want to feel. But when you come out and you just go, hey, just be yourself. You go, what does that mean? I'm being myself with you right now. Is it particularly dramatic? That's why it's scary when you write a book, because you're writing about your own thoughts, and it's very revealing. Whereas through a character, you can utilize yourself, but through the, idiosyncrasies of somebody else.
So you moved down to L.A. I think you basically moved in with your dad, right?
I moved in. I didn't move down. I was kicked out of my house.
You were kicked out of your house by your mom.
Yeah.
And you, because you were getting into a lot of trouble, I think it's fair to say.
I think that's fair to say.
And when you moved down to LA, at that point, were you also thinking of pursuing acting? Was that?
No, I wanted to. The motivation was to do something different. So I'd been into it before when I was a kid, like everybody, but I got deeply into martial arts. I was studying with a guy named Jun Chong, who was close to where the couch my dad was living with his to-be wife, and I slept on the couch, and they were in an apartment. And again, you think, oh, it's my dad, so he must be in a mansion. But it's like whatever perception that people, kind of throw onto an actor and what he's doing. And, I remember my dad at some point was at an apartment complex in Pacific Palisades, and it just housed like a bunch of old school 70s actors. I remember visiting him. It was like his kind of low point. And I was like, oh, I remember you from the 70s. I remember you from the 70s. How sad is this? This is so weird. It's such a weird moment. How did you all end up in the same apartment complex? But what were we talking about?
You moved down there.
I moved down there.
Because you're 15, I think, around
16.
You moved 16, okay, yeah.
I was 16. I drove down there in my Honda Civic. And I just wanted something to change. I grew up with a bunch of kids that called themselves, or they were called the Cito Rats, and it was a surf culture, and a lot of those people didn't make it. And
some of those kids were rich kids.
I think some were well off. Like one dad ran a restaurant, a Mexican restaurant, and one dad was a dentist, and then one dad was a mechanic, and then it was just a potpourri of, and that's what Montecito was then. It's less that now. Montecito was just a whole mix. It was
avocado trees and orange trees.
That's absolutely right. So when I went down there, I was like, what can I do? I had missed 36 out of 56 days of school in 11th grade, and then I went down and I said, I want to get my shit together, and I actually wanted to. So this acting thing, I was like, I talked to my pop, and my pop's like, you can try to find an agent. And I went from agent to agent. I called all these agents myself, and I made up a resume. I was 100% bullshit. And I had found plays and started to read plays and made up theaters like the Librero International Theater, which doesn't exist. And, what was it like doing Streetcar at the Librero Theater? Oh, my God, that was a great production. I love that director so much. And then, I think everybody knew I was full of shit. And there was one woman, Hilary Shore, at Leading Artists Agency. It was a very small agency, who said yes and gave me a shot. And I went and I auditioned for everything. And I was told left and right, don't do this, and you're green, and oh, you're Brolin's son, you want to be an actor? Okay, so go ahead, act. Let me see it.
Yeah.
Well, do you want me to do a monologue for you? Thanks for coming in. That's what I thought. So there's a lot of people that also, have an idea of what it is if your father's an actor, and they go, I don't want to be one of the people that help you, that give you another spoon. Don't you already have a spoon?
Yeah.
That kind of thing, which for me was all good. We were talking about my brother before. For me, it just put more fight in me. I was like, I'm not going to let these people win.
You, I'm sure it didn't feel like it was overnight, but I mean, by 17, you got a pretty significant role. I mean, a role that, of course, your first major role, a role that anybody from my generation remembers so well because it's a movie that is kind of an important, iconic film for anybody who was a kid or teenager in the 80s, the Goonies. Mm-hmm. You play Brandon Walsh. And that, I think that was much of that was filmed in Oregon, right?
In Oregon and California, Northern California, Bodega Bay, and in Los Angeles on stage. Some of those tunnels were on stage. And the ship was on stage.
And the ship was on, right. Mm-hmm. And you're 17, you're in that film. Mm-hmm. Sean Astin and all these other young actors. And first of all, was there any way for you to know that film, it was the 80s, it was different, a film like that, I think you probably could have predicted was going to be successful, but there were also flops. There were also films like that didn't make it. Did you have a sense when you were working on that film that it was going to become what it became?
I don't think you ever have a sense. I've done enough films that have become something. Each one a different thing. No Country was something. Avengers is something. Sicario is something. Milk was something. But I don't know if we've ever felt, I mean, when you're working with good people, but then when you get into a habit, given the choice of working with one great filmmaker after the next, I don't know. Maybe you're numb to it. I don't know. But what's that really special film? Like there was nothing. That's why I parallel in the book Goonies with No Country, because they're the two movies that just felt more familial than as opposed to doing something that was going to be iconic. Do you know what I mean? So I had done a lot of auditions. I got Goonies. That never should have happened. I just fit the role perfectly at that time, and I next to Sean Astin, I looked right. I looked, dumb and buff and blonde and whatever it was that was needed, and I was what was needed, and it worked. I didn't know what I was doing. It worked, but I thought that's how movies were done. I thought every movie was going to be like the Goonies. So success-wise, we were in a different time too. It wasn't all about opening weekend. You see great pictures. If you go on the internet, once in a while somebody will send me a picture of like, an old 80s, what do you call it? The above the theater. What do you call it?
The marquee.
The marquee, and then a line around 2 blocks. Like remember lines?
Yeah.
When you'd show up 2 hours early, 2.5 hours early to see something, and you couldn't wait, and you weren't getting inundated left and right of what the story was and all that, and it was just word of mouth, and it was a really special time. But then after that, it got real.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to jump ahead too far, but just kind of to bookend this for a moment and then to come back, which is it would be about 20 years between Goonies and No Country for Old Men. And obviously you did films and had roles in between, but
22
years. And for many people who saw No Country for Old Men, it was like, who is this great actor? Like, where's he been? Mm-hmm. Right? Like, and so you say it got real after Goonies, and I'm assuming you mean it got real and that it wasn't like all of a sudden it became easy for you to get great roles.
No, it was a job. I think I got Thrashin', which was the next thing, which was a pivotal job because it threw me into, when I saw it, I went, I'm so bad, I'm hurting people. So I need to go do something about this. Like,
You said, I'm so bad I'm hurting people. Tell me more about what you mean.
well, I mean, I just was horrible in the film. When you have no understanding of what you're doing, but you think you do because you're reading Stanislavski and you're reading Grotowski and you're reading Antonin Artaud and you think that's helping when truthfully, like in order to build a skill, which kind of you and I talked about before, when you hit, your 40s and you kind of, there's this an understanding or a master understanding of whatever the skill that you're developing, you have to do it. You actually have to do it. You can't, read about doing, gluing together an airplane, a model airplane. You have to actually do it and go, oh, fuck the glue and this. If you put too much glue, it's going to drip and it's going to affect that thing or whatever that is. And I still didn't know what I was doing. So I realized at that point I need to go study. And then there was somebody that came into my life when I was 20, Anthony Zerbe, who affected me in a major, major way, who's still one of my best friends. And he would put...
This is a theater friend, right?
Yeah, he was a guy that I was doing a series with, the Young Riders in Tucson, Arizona. And he, I would literally wake up, open my door to go to work, and there'd be 8 books on my doorstep, just different plays and different things to read and painters and poets and this and that. And he just...
is Anthony the same age as you?
No, Anthony's 80, in his late 80s.
So he was more like a mentor.
Yeah, but he was just my buddy, man. I mean, he was a mentor that in the grander sense, but he was just my buddy. He was just somebody who I clicked with, and he clicked with me.
And he encouraged you to go on stage, to try theater? To go back to theater? Yeah,
I was terrified of memorizing and all that. I had some just terrors and typical actor fears and usually when you were doing a series, I was lucky enough to get a series. It was the second series I had done, and the first series was kind of a failure, and so what you did is, during hiatus between seasons, if you were lucky enough to be between seasons, knowing you were going to go into another season, you would try and do a movie. Like, 'cause that's what you wanted to do. Back then, you went from TV, and then hopefully you ended up in movies, and maybe at the end of your career, you ended up in TV again just to make some money before you die. And so, Anthony was like, no, come to Rochester, New York with me. I have a couple of spots at Jiva Theater, and you need to do plays. That's what you need to do. And I listened.
You had, I think it was at that theater where you had a kind of a, disastrous isn't the word I want to use, but maybe that is the word that I should use, opening night.
Yeah, man.
What
it was
what
the
happened?
opening night. It was 3 new plays and rotating rep. And that's how it worked during the summer spot, basically like summer stock. 3 plays. I was in 2 of the 3 plays. Forgiving Typhoid Mary was the one that was opening the whole thing. It was like, that's where they were giving the grants to the writers and $5,000 each or whatever it was. And then it opened with our play. Oh, the Innocents was the other play. And that was being directed by Joe Montello, who's a big theater director now and a great actor. But that was the first play he ever directed. And Forgiving Typhoid Mary had a big speech that sets up the whole play. And they said, finally, let's get to the play. And we've given out these grants. And, here we go. And the lights go out. And then the lights slowly come up. And Typhoid Mary is behind me in an amber light. And I come out in my cassock and my glasses. And I set up the whole thing with the worst Irish accent you ever heard in your whole life.
It's not bad.
And I said, yeah, thank you. And I go into this speech, and it would be different now, but I go into this speech and I do something, like typical, where I take off my glasses and I clean my glasses and I look up and it's just gone. And I'm looking out at 700 people. And I go, and now I would be like, oh, it's gone. You can improvise a little bit. You can bring it back. I still have another 4 or 5 pages left, and which sets up the whole play. Like I said, like without the speech, the play starts to not make sense. And And it just never came back. It was an arrow to China, man. It was never coming back. So I had remembered things from a first draft. I mean, I just started spitting out words, just English, any English word that would come out of my mouth. It was just nonsensical horseshit. And at least from my point of view, Anthony was like, "You're a playwright." That's the first thing he said. He ran backstage because I was sitting there. I ran out of words. I sat there. I finally ran off stage. The light stayed on for way too long, then turned off because they had to go manual at that point because they knew I was so far off. I went backstage. Both stage hands had their head in their hands. And then Zerby was there, and he's like, "Nobody knows." I go, "No, man, they all know. Like, you're my friend, and you're bullshitting me because I have the rest of the play to do. There's no fucking way I'm going back out there." And he's like, "I'm telling you, you're a playwright." Right. You know, and
he was right.
And to
Nobody
this day,
knew.
Nobody, but who knows? I don't know who to believe.
They didn't.
Probably. I think now, I know what you're saying, and I think now, having seen so many plays and been involved in so many plays, and what you think, what you're so sensitive to, is just not the case. And they might have not known, but they probably did. It was pretty massive. You know, it looked like I saw the heads do, you know, what dogs do with a high-pitched whistle, and I saw a few like what's happening? So I think a few knew.
But it sounds like, I mean, you know, I hesitate to ask this question because it's just sort of a predictable question, but did that change anything about how you approached your roles or how you thought about, I mean, I'm sure you were really well prepared, right? But it just kind of happened. It was like almost like maybe like a panic attack or something.
No, it was something very specific, actually. I remember going right before I went on stage, it was opening night. I'd never experienced an opening night like that. And I thought of De Niro at the end of Raging Bull before he goes on stage and he's practicing that monologue. And he's going like this. Mm-hmm. And I go, I want to be that comfortable. I know he was nervous. The character's nervous, at least in Raging Bull. And he's hyping himself up and he's ready to go out. And I wanted to be that guy. So I wasn't Josh preparing for a role. I was Josh wanting to be De Niro, wanting to be perceived as great in a role. And after that, I never did that again. It was another level in going to, using my dad's words, going to war with myself and not giving myself a break. And even to this day, like what I just told you about doing Rian Johnson's movie, I've talked to Tony Hopkins about this. It's like, there's some fear in me that says, if you don't prep, something's going to happen. So I prep in a major, major way. And I think I have an ability to be able to let it go when I finally do it. But I know that stuff on a cellular level.
Yeah. You were consistently working, I mean, from the time of Goonies up until today, and even No Country for Old Men. I mean, that was film or television. But I gather clearly there was a moment in your life and in your 20s when I imagine you thought, this is probably not going to work out. I mean, for time being, you became like a stock trader.
I mean, I had to earn money. I had children going to school and I just wasn't making money, man. I mean, I wasn't, you know, if you're lucky enough to make $100,000 a year, you know, which I wasn't, if you're lucky enough, then you're clearing $30,000. After taxes and commissions, and if you have a lawyer and you have a manager and an agent and all this stuff that I had back then. But it just wasn't cutting it. So, you know, I met a guy, Brett Markinson, on the airplane. We really hit it off. We laughed a lot, and he traded. It was part of what he did. He was an entrepreneur, but he traded, and he was very disciplined in it. And I was just curious. It was another thing to be curious about. I'm in a profession that works really well for me because I'm an insatiably curious person.
Yes.
So I can delve into these other mentalities or professions or this or that, and then I can leave it. I don't have to do it for my whole life. I'm very lucky in that way. I feel very blessed in that way because I get to touch all these different things. I get to feel like I've lived 50 lives instead of one or two. And Brett Markinson was, I just absolutely, I still adore him to this day. And he was telling me about trading. So he was a guy who loves to talk and loves to teach. And I'm a guy who's not afraid of asking questions, the same question 50 times until I understand. So I went and I got TradeStation, and I had my 3 screens, and I had all my graphs, and I had 4 tabs per screen. And you look at stochastics, and you look at this type of thing, and I go, I don't know what this means. What does that mean? Support and resistance, and I don't understand. And how does it turn around, and why does it turn around? And all this stuff that's super boring to talk about because nobody's interested in it like I am, And then on top of it, eventually I'm doing Wall Street too, and I'm talking to all these billionaires, and I have all that knowledge. So then I have, this ability to be able to talk to them about finances and discipline and fear and greed and all this kind of stuff. It was an interesting thing for me to get into, and then I ended up, when I was really on it, which I'm not now. I'm a long-term trader now. I don't pretend to day trade because if you do that, you have to be up at 4:30 every morning, and you have to know your basket, and you have done your due diligence for what you're trading for that day and the night before. But I made more money than I had ever made acting, for sure.
Wow.
By far.
Wow.
And it wasn't just because I got lucky with one stock that went to the roof. I was very disciplined in breadths of upward momentum, fairly solid stocks. So I'd get it when it would go down. I'd sell it when it would go up. I'd get it when it would go down and sell it when it would go up.
Wow. So it seems like in 2007, well, the film was released in 2007, No Country for Old Men, but when you got that role, you had already kind of been assuming that you were never, maybe, I don't know, is it fair to say that you were never going to sort of reach a certain level?
I was going to be a working actor, and that was okay with me. I mean, I had embraced that insofar that I would keep doing it as long as it fed me in some way. And I don't mean financially.
Yeah.
I knew that I could figure financials out. I knew that I could support myself not just through acting. So I did the last TV show that I had done, which with Lawrence O'Donnell Jr., who is kind of the protege on what was that called, West Wing, and he's the senior political analyst for MSNBC, and he. Very smart guy, and he did this thing called Mr. Sterling that I did, and we thought it would be a hit, and it wasn't, and I was plastered all over Times Square and Sunset Boulevard and all that. And once we got to
I think Audra McDonald was in that too.
Audra McDonald,
we had her on the show, yeah.
Oh, I know you did.
Yeah,
I know you did. And Audra McDonald, and she'll tell you this. I was like, hey, I heard you sing, because I'm so dumb and. I couldn't do a crossword if and I just go, or she's like, yeah, I sing a little bit, having no idea that she had won like 4 Tonys. And we did that thing, and I told myself after that, because TV was so consuming at that point, doing a network television series, that there was no care really put into it, as much as you tried. And I said, I would rather not act than do TV. And I never did TV again until very recently. I didn't do TV for 20 years. So again, for somebody who needs to provide for their family, there was still some version of integrity, personal integrity, that was only based on my sensibility of I don't want to do that. Well, you can do the dating game. Maybe you'll get seen and you'll get a job out of that. No. Take that money. We're offering you a few $1 million to do this thing. You've just done No Country. Yeah, but I don't want to do that. Yeah, but you need money, don't you? Yes, desperately. And it's just kind of, it's been okay. It all works out okay. And the story's more interesting anyway.
When you had the opportunity to work with the Coen brothers, first of all, imagine as somebody who studies and studied films and plays and read a lot, because I know that's something that Zerby was handing you all these things to kind of consume.
Mm-hmm.
I have to imagine that you were like a fan of their work. Yet you hadn't worked with them until that point, right?
No, I'd never met them. And yeah, I was a fan of Fargo, and I was a fan of,
Lebowski.
Blood Simple, Lebowski. Yeah, but there was nobody that you could have asked me then, like, if you could work with one filmmaker, or in that case, two filmmakers, who would it be? I just go, well, if I could just work with the Coens, my life would be great. I didn't have that. I still don't have that. I kind of wish I did. If you had one role that you could play, what role would that be? I don't know. What do you got? Like, let's talk about it. But so, I did, which I'm not going to tell the story because I've told it a million times. I did an audition from Grindhouse because I had a friend that gave me a role because I knew him. And that was Robert Rodriguez for Grindhouse. And it was during Grindhouse that I did an audition for No Country, and the response was, who lit it? They didn't even mention me. They liked the way it was lit, though. And that was it. I didn't get the role. And by the way, the role was Heath Ledger's early on, and he had pulled out of that role. And because he was working too much, and he had just done Brokeback Mountain, he said, I don't want to do another Western thing. And so my agent, got Ethan's phone number and said, please see him. And I know they were frustrated, and they were finally going to decide on somebody that they knew and they trusted. And they said, okay, fine, let him come in. And I was told in Santa Barbara. I was up at my son's school, and they told me at 10 o'clock, and they faxed me 6 scenes. And I had to be there at 9 o'clock the next morning, and I was. I showed up. Like, that's what you do when you're a working actor. It's like, hey, there's the possibility. You got to fly here. You got to fly there. You have to drive here. You have to show up here. Everybody wants to assess you.
Did you feel, I have to imagine, I mean, given, and that was an amazing year, right? No Country for Old Men, and then I think also the same year,
American Gangster.
But there was another film that came out, There Will Be Blood. Obviously not this, you were not in it, but two like iconic films, sort of Western films that came out that year. It was an amazing, 2007 is an amazing year for films. That experience, right? The film wins Best Picture, right? I mean, it's nominated for 8 Academy Awards. Like, it is a major cultural moment, right, that year. And I have to imagine after that film, your career, your life changed pretty dramatically.
It did. People were more interested. Like, I was in the river swimming one-armed, away from the dog when I got the audition for American Gangster.
Yeah.
So I was working nights, and I was up all night. I came home from Taos to Santa Fe in the morning, and then I filmed my own audition back when people didn't film their auditions for American Gangster, and my 16-year-old son at the time played Denzel's part. So, that was still, it's not like I did No Country and people were like, there are movies I didn't get.
Yeah.
From directors that I won't care to mention, but that said, we're thinking about him for this role. Can we see No Country, or can we see at least a couple of scenes? And then them seeing a couple of scenes and then saying, not that I think they're wrong, but they said no. Like, he's wrong. I don't think he's not. I remember for this one role, he said he's not presidential enough, and then I went on to go play Milk and W.
Yeah.
So it's not, I think it was after Milk and after I got nominated that's when choices started happening.
And I mean, you were 40, right, at that point. And not to say
Mhm.
that's old. It's just that you saw so many of your peers over the years. It probably seemed like, oh, they're succeeding or whatever that actually means. And I have to imagine that at that point in your life, it felt pretty gratifying, because it was hard won. It wasn't like,
It was hard won and it felt
yeah,
gratifying, but it never felt like finally. It never felt like that because I've never been, and I don't even know why, and I feel bad for people who are, but I've never been the jealous type. I've never been the kind of angry, resentful type. I remember Good Will Hunting coming out and just being so jazzed that Matt Damon existed. I was like, God, that was so good. That was so good. So I would get off on performances. I was more getting off on the performances than what the actor behind the performance, how he was being perceived or she being perceived. But I do know that it was frustrating because I would lose roles to people who I didn't think were necessarily really good actors. And we know now it's like, look, bad actors can have great careers and great actors can have no careers. That's the thing about our industry is you don't know. It can be a look, it can be a thing, it can be a vibe, or it can be a great technician or somebody like, Anthony Hopkins who gets Silence of the Lambs at 55. And has been struggling since then. And then he has a whole career from 55 to 85.
Yeah, it's a really good analogy. I think it's a really good example.
It's right. Just he's amazing.
One of the great living actors.
Literally
right?
one of the great living
yes,
actors
yeah.
and was one of the great living actors before that. I remember somebody said to me in an interview, how does it feel to be doing A+ work now when you were doing C- work? And I was like, fuck you, man. Who said I was doing C- work? It may be perceived as a C- movie, but I was bringing an A game to everything I could with whatever ability I had. I never kind of just phoned it in. I've never phoned it in. I did nothing different in No Country than I did in, the one day I did in Milwaukee when I put on the G-string and the pantyhose.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And that's true, by the way.
How much of it is about luck then? I mean, I think you're right? Like how much of what happens to an actor is because of just chance or fortune.
It goes back to the nepotism that you're talking about. It's like nepotism will take you how far?
Yeah.
If you can't do it, if you're lucky enough to be lucky, then what? You have to show up. You have to have incentive. You have to be, if you're a dick to work with and you're super talented and your movies don't make any money, you're not going to work for very long. You know what I mean? It's just too hard and there's no payoff. It is a business. When it comes down to it, it is a business. I love working hard and I love collaborating with people that don't have a massive ego. And I've been lucky enough to find that the better filmmakers out there have there's less compensation, like the status, the focus on status and focus on perception and all that. They just want to tell a great fucking story and they're obsessed with it. It's almost like they're on the spectrum a bit.
There are too many sort of characters to dive into, but I want to see if we can dive in briefly to three of them because two of them are Dan White and George W. Bush. As you know, I live in the Bay Area, so that the milk story is so iconic here. When you land at San Francisco Airport, Terminal 1 is the Harvey Milk Terminal, and there's a beautiful exhibition about his life. And that character that you played is a very complex character, and because he's a villain, but he's not. It's not so cut and dry. It's more complicated than that. And George W. Bush, same thing. It's a complicated story. Let me ask you about George W. Bush because obviously there were people who hated that film, people who felt that it was an unfair portrayal of him, etc. In the context of where we are today in history, I think there's been a reevaluation of him, fair or unfairly, right? There's just been a reevaluation of him. especially in light of where politics have gone.
Mhm.
He's kind of seen as a mainstream kind of establishment figure, even sympathetic in some ways. And I wonder how you see him. I mean, does it matter? I mean, obviously you become him. You become that character. You get that West Texas accent. But do you have to like a character to really or like something about things about them to become them?
I don't know. I don't think about that stuff. I don't think about whether I like. I mean, do I like or dislike anybody? I mean, there are things that I like about people, and it's like every good has a little evil, and every evil has a little good, and I'm interested in that. Like, where's the thing that I can't see?
I guess do you understand them in ways that you couldn't have? Like even Dan White.
That's the whole point. That the acting is not, I've heard many times, and I would like to get there one day. They're like, the only thing I like about acting is between action and cut. And I go, really? That's the worst part. And be like, when you're in the zone, and it's like, yeah, I've been in the zone. It's hard to get in the zone and not see the camera right there and I think that happens more now that I become less conscious of it all. And I look forward to those moments, but I think it's the research into that.
It's everything in front.
Yeah,
that happens
it's everything.
Beforehand.
And that's
it's like hearing something at a gas station and saying, "Let me listen to your accent." Again.
Whether you're a photojournalist or a journalist or an actor or it's like that. That's why I think all those professions that I looked at and I go, I want to be that, or that's interesting to me because you're constantly changing your view and you're getting to know certain, new people, and you're getting, new little nucleuses in the culture, and you're, getting to be able to get in there and like find, so there's something really wonderful about researching a behavior that's unfamiliar to you. So when Oliver came to me, and one of the early scripts of W was hard hitting, and I was like, "But you can see this on CNN right now. Let's turn on CNN, and we're basically going to see this script. Isn't it more interesting that this black sheep in his family, that was never supposed to amount to anything, that was alcoholic, got sober at 40, and became the president of the United States?"
Yeah.
How did that happen? What happened to Jed? How did Jed feel? Jeb? How did he feel about it? What was his upbringing? And it, again, not to do this on purpose, but it's bringing it back to my book. It's like, what is this book to you? And you go, the book is the making of somebody who found creativity as an outlet, and ultimately to get away from his kind of self-destructive learnings of what he grew up within, and that's, so me, this is just exploring me, further exploring me. It's me doing the same thing that I would do for a role in my off time between 2 a.m. and 5 a.m. when I'm not raising kids.
Yeah. But there's no question that what you just said, like, of course there are things about that you, especially with your story, would relate to. And many of us would. Like, here's a guy who was a fuck-up, right, his whole life, and then turns it around and becomes president of the United States.
And then what do you do with it? And what do you do with it in these horrible decisions that you don't have any perspective on? These horrible decisions, were they him? Were they Cheney? Were they this? Was he really controlled? Were they this? Is the president alone up there? That's why I heard somebody say about debates. When a president is debating and he or she kind of fumbles through something, you go, yeah, but you can't blame them for that. They're surrounded by a cabinet that are telling them things. So they're not supposed to know everything and be right there with every answer, the right answer, right at the time that you ask it. There's an expectation. And I thought, well, I wonder what that kind of pressure was like on somebody who had fumbled and fumbled and fumbled like myself. I'm sure that's what Oliver saw. He said, there's something about Josh that reminds me of this guy, and I'm not going to take that so cosmetically. I'm like, what do you mean? I remind you of W. How dare you? It's like, what's behind the guy? Oh, I get it. He had a dad who was doing well, and then the son gets into it, but the son was more reactive. The son wasn't as smart, maybe. The son, didn't focus as well. And then how did those people, it goes back to like Einstein. You go, what do you mean Einstein failed mathematics? What do you mean Einstein was really guilty about the atom bomb? And then you hear some of those quotes and you go, that's interesting to me. Not how we won all the time. Sicarios are really fun, but if you miss the humanity in Sicario, you've missed the whole thing.
It's the complexity, right? That's what's interesting about these characters. It's that they're not. You can't evaluate them as an either or, whether it's Dan White or whether you're playing a Marvel Comics character or George. Yeah,
Dan White was the great white hope, and then he was put into a much bigger pond, and he was the big fish in a small pond. Then he got in a big pond, and there were smarter people, and there were more resilient people. And when you have a gay person who's dealt with, obstacle after obstacle after obstacle, and then you have obstacles in your life, if you're used to it, you're going to be more resilient. You're going to know how to ebb and flow. You're going to know how to bob and weave appropriately. And then if you have good intention behind it, you actually may get things done if you care about people, as opposed to just always focused on yourself of, that guy's making me look bad. That actor has gotten that role. Why not me? I should be doing that role. I should be getting that Academy Award. Fucking loosen up, man. You're not getting the bigger picture. And the bigger picture is, are we all in it together or are we not? Or is it just about me, 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 me? And that's, again, I go back to that, and it's an interesting trajectory to follow from different personalities. It's definitely more dramatic. They go, why do you play such bad guy roles or whatever? Because they're more interesting. Because they've created films and membranes of an idea of themselves. And then if you actually start cutting those down, or those facades aren't working anymore, what happens? When you take the lobster shell off the lobster, what is it? Is it freaking out because it feels so naked and exposed nerves and all that? All that. I mean, it sounds like a big jerk off, but it's really the truth. It's like, what are we made of? And I think that's, again, going back to this book and getting in your 50s, is you go, that's what's happening more and more right now. Should I go do a play again? Should I write a book? Should I do this? All these things that interest me. But how can I challenge myself further? Because my ultimate goal is to be on my deathbed and go and just laugh. That was fun. That was fun, and people could rely on me, and I didn't shit on everybody, just in celebration of myself.
Josh, your mom, I know was tragically killed in a car accident when you were a young guy. You were in your 20s. And so she wasn't really able to see, you kind of come to fruition as like a major actor.
No.
Your dad has seen that. I mean, and you are, I mean, he's round, right? And I wonder, and I hope it's not too sensitive a question, but how is your relationship with him now? I mean, are you close? Do you see him?
I do. I think I'm closer now with him than I've ever been. Because, also he's older now.
And you are too.
And I am too. Exactly. Yeah. And well put. And yeah, I'm older, and, the whole rivalry thing that I felt in the beginning, and hoeing my own road and being my own man and all that kind of stuff. I think that all that stuff is very real and very necessary too. It's like some form of cutting the umbilical cord, you know what I mean? In becoming my own actor. But I did that very early on, and I did theater, and he had never done theater. And, part of that was reactive. And then it just, again, luck. It's like I found a guy who kind of directed me in a way that was really authentic and organic and great. But I love my pop. Yeah, I was just with him the other day. It was my daughter's birthday, and he came up, and he and his wife came up, and it was really, really nice. There's moments that really flow now, where there were very few and far between, because we're very different. We're very different. I know I'm outspoken, and I'm not really concerned about the impact that I'm having so much, you know. I know that we're just kind of like swimming through all this shit. And discovering things along the way. Whereas I think my pop was more focused on impact early on, and I think he's let some of that go, and I've let some of my shit go, and it's fun to just be a couple of guys who appreciate each other.
Yeah. And your stepmom is Barbra Streisand.
She is. Which, when you're in the family, that doesn't mean a lot. And remember, I'm the guy that says, I heard you sing. You know, I'm that idiot.
Yeah.
So, yeah, when you're raised on Waylon Jennings and Janis Joplin and Jesse Coulter and all that, that doesn't have the meaning that it has for other people. But I sure appreciate her very much, very much. She can still sing, but it's more than that. She's like a diamond, like a very, very sharp diamond. It's like if you were to put a shitty diamond or needle on a record, she's the one who would say, that's not good enough. We can make it sound better than that. There's a sharper diamond that should go on that record player. And I love that. Maybe I'll play her someday.
Maybe you mentioned Anthony Hopkins and this incredible career he really kind of had after 55.
Yeah.
You've just turned, you are just past 55. So now, I mean, if you're looking at an Anthony Hopkins career, there's a lot ahead of you.
Yeah.
What do you want to do that you haven't been able to do yet?
I've been lucky enough to do everything I've wanted to do. But I don't see an end to that. So I look forward to being surprised by what isn't revealed yet. I think I'm capable of more. Just saying that scares me, because I think just saying it on your podcast is going to make somebody come out from under a rock and say, "Oh yeah, well let's see this." And
they won't. They won't.
No, but even if they do, I say it because I'm looking for that. I'm scared of it, but I'm looking for that. You know, I think that happened. I remember, anyway. So yeah, Tony Hopkins, who's a good buddy and somebody who I've always looked up to very much. You know, Denzel also always looked up to Denzel and the kind of work that he was doing, and he does different work now, but it's still great. He's always great. And I look at those guys and I just go, from a behavioral stance, you revealed more than most. I don't know if it's your intelligence. I don't know if it's your bravery. I don't know what it is, but I watch their movies and I want to be a better person. You know, we watched the other night, and it just kind of came out of nowhere. We watched Silence of the Lambs, ironically, the other night. It's just so good.
I hope not with your little kids.
No.
Okay.
They were in bed, and my wife and I, but I was like, I miss great films.
Yes. Yeah.
And even though, you know, you do something like, you know, he made them look almost directly into the camera, and that could have not worked. It was a very brave thing to do, Jonathan Demme. It could have been really dumb, you know, distracting, but it just all worked. The music worked, the kind of heightened character that Hopkins did, what Jodie Foster did, just everything about it. And I finished the movie and I was so tired, because when you have young kids, you're so tired all the time and you're just forging ahead and you're like, I know I should be in bed getting sleep because we're going to be up at 5:30 in the morning. But I finished that film, and that's one of those reasons where you go, why do you keep doing what you do, or what do you want to do? When I see a film like that, I'm still so incredibly cellularly moved. I go, this is greatness. And maybe the ego in me wants to be associated with greatness. Maybe that there's something in that where I go, I don't know how No Country for Old Men is going to be perceived, but the fact, because we had a really good time doing it, You know, it wasn't serious and it wasn't this. And Javier was a little serious because he was a little depressed at the whole thing. But it was how it was perceived. It is really nice. It's really nice when somebody comes up with something, whether it's a painting or a sculpture or a song or lyrics or a movie or a play, where you go, man, I'm either inspired or exhilarated, ignited, moved. And that to me is the greatest feeling in the world.
Yeah. I think True Grit is similarly, at that level, and Milk and others, and just on Silence of the Lambs, even to this day, and I'm sure you may have this experience, if I hear American Girl by Tom Petty on the radio at night, I turn it off. Because I'm just so haunted by that song.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's great.
Josh, thank you so much. It was great talking with you.
Yeah, it was great talking to you, man. You know, I listened to some of your podcast earlier on, and I was actually really excited. Yeah, you're a good dude.
Thank you. Thank you. Congrats on the book. And
thank you.
And good luck with the book tour.
I appreciate it. I'll do my best, man.
Hey, thanks so much for watching my conversation with actor Josh Brolin. He just released his new memoir. It's called From Under the Truck. And if you want to see more videos like this one, please subscribe to this channel. We post new conversations every week. And of course, we are an audio podcast as well. Just search for The Great Creators wherever you listen to podcasts, Spotify, Apple, Amazon Music. We're there and on all platforms. I'm Guy Raz. This has been The Great Creators from Built It Productions. We'll be right back here with another conversation next week. Thanks for watching.